I'd always intended to do a 22-year career in the military. That was like a target for myself personally. There are a load of similarities, and that goes right across the board, not just from an engineering perspective, but from a personnel perspective. I only ever worked on fast jet squadrons. I equate what I experienced there very closely to what I experienced in the garage when we're at the track. Obviously, we have 2 cars as opposed to 8 or 10 aeroplanes, but the mentality and the efforts required to ensure that you get the cars out on time, safely, ready to go, is the same as a a fast jet squadron, for example. All of those things that you get drilled into you during basic training in the military, regardless of service, they carry on here in Formula One without any shadow of a doubt. Get on with the CV like as early as you possibly can. Like I did 9-10 years before I knew I was going to even be in a position to think about leaving. My name's Jonathan Wilcox. I'm the Trackside Electronics Support Engineer for the Mercedes-AMG Formula One team. The mechanics will build the car physically. I build it electronically, and by that I mean I take all of the sensors. So each sensor has an assembly or a part number, and then a serial number or a life number, as we call them. And I need to make sure that the right life numbers are into my car project. So I use a piece of software that I then talk to the car and can see what the car is doing. So, and it's a lot of very kind of rudimentary stuff: pressures, temperatures, calibrations, various measurements, be that in displacement or in G or in volume. The Wednesday and Thursday of a race week are my busiest days, because they're the days where we're busy building the car, and I have to go through a whole raft of checks and tests. So gearbox calibration checks, we do lots of fire-ups as well of the car, and I do a systems check in certainly once a day at least across a race weekend, which involves doing an automatic shift check, and then I get the mechanic in the car to do a shift check, and I check things like the braking system. So we have a brake-by-wire system, so I make sure that that's functional and that the pedal travel is good. So I'm constantly looking at data coming off the car to make sure that all of these systems work correctly and mean that we're going to be good to go racing. So I joined the RAF March 10th, 1999 as an aircraft engineer. I streamed as an avionics engineer, much to my father's amusement, who previously served as an airframes technician. So he was kind of hoping I'd go more down the mechanical route, I think, but I went avionics. And I spent the vast majority of my career working on Tornadoes. I did a short tour around 2.5 years on the Red Arrows, and I finished my career back at Marham on Tornadoes, and then eventually streamed on to F-35 for the last 4 years of my career. So that was March 10th, 99 until I officially left in January of 2022. I joined the Mercedes team in October of 2021. When I was serving on the Red Arrows, we had the Mercedes demo team come to Scampton with the BBC to make a film. I've been a lifelong petrol head. Basically anything with an engine that goes quickly, I'm interested in. So whether that's jet boat racing or V8 supercars, any kind of motorsport, 2 wheels, 4 wheels, anything, right up to like Red Bull air racing and things like that. So I've always been interested. So the second I knew they were coming to Scampton, I was completely like, okay, wow, this is incredible. I need to just bend the ears off the engineers, which is what I did. I struck up a friendship with Pete Bonington, who was there, who at the time was Lewis's race engineer. Lewis had just joined the team for the 2013 season, and he was there to race what was at the time Michael Schumacher's 2011 V8 F1 car down the runway against squadron leader Mike Ling, who was the Red 10 pilot at the time. And Lewis also went flying as well, as did David Coulthard, who was there from the BBC to cover it, to make the film. So I spent 2 days basically chewing the ear off the engineers that were there, looking around the car, trying to learn, about the electronics and I guess the avionics, if you want to call it, of the car. And I stayed in touch with a few of the guys. I'd always intended to do a 22-year career in the military. That was like a target for myself personally. But because of that, I also knew that I would need to be prepared for a civilian role in whatever industry, not focusing on Formula One, just I'd need to have a civilian job at some stage. So by 2013, I'd already, had a CV prepared. There was a couple of guys that I worked with at the time who'd done some CV writing courses and were very proficient at preparing CVs that took what we did in the military and applied it broadly to various types of engineering roles within civilian life. So I already had a CV, and I was able to just kind of keep that up to date and tweak it and tailor it, and just as I did things in the RAF, I'd add them to my CV. So when it came to me having a conversation with Evan Short, who is now my boss, at the time, he said, we're keen as a team to explore whether or not we can employ people that are outside of the somewhat incestuous nature of the Formula One pit lane, where people move between teams and you have that, real strong level of experience within the pit lane. But are there any other opportunities that teams could explore externally? And that's something that Mercedes is very keen to do. So they offered me the chance for an interview for an electronics technician's role, pinning, depinning connectors. And a lot of the connectors that we use on the car are very, very similar to what's used in certainly in military aviation. So I went down to Brackley, and at the time as well, 2014 was that huge regulation change into the hybrid, the 1.6 litre V6 hybrid power unit era from 2014. So there was a huge amount of change going on behind the scenes. So they needed experience. So he was very honest. He said, it's likely that you're not going to be hired. However, we feel it would be a benefit to us, but also a benefit to you to experience and to have a civilian style interview, yada, yada, yada. So I was like, absolutely, I'll take any opportunity to get that experience. So went down for the interview. Obviously knew I wasn't going to get the role, but the interview went really well. I took a lot from it. They got a lot from me. And as a consequence, I just stayed in touch with the guys, stayed in touch with Bono, Evan and Rob. And an opportunity came about when I was in Florida. I was there doing my F-35 conversion course at Eglin Air Force Base. And 2017, and Rob contacted me and he said, we've got a role that's come up. It's a systems engineer role, which we feel is going to you'd be perfect for it. I went for the interview. I was offered the role. I reluctantly, but for the right reasons, decided I had to turn down the role. So I did, and I thought, well, okay, that's probably been my one chance of being able to work for the team. So I've remained very good friends with Bono and Rob and Evan, and just stayed in touch with them, and would just, we'd message back and forth across a race weekend, because I would always watch the racing on the TV, and I would ask questions. And so 2021 came about, February 21. So that was into my 22nd year in the military. And Rob contacted me and he said, so the person that the person that we hired, because you turned us down back in 2017, he has handed his notice in. How are you fixed now? And it was, the timing was essentially perfect. So I had to re-interview for the role, of course, jump through all the same hoops as everybody else. And they offered me the role. My first trackside experience was non-operationally. So I had plenty of training to do, but my first experience trackside was Abu Dhabi of 2021, which was obviously quite a momentous race for a manner of reasons, but it was very surreal to be in the garage when the Drivers' Championship concluded that year. And there was a bit of me that was kind of thinking, what the hell have I let myself in for here? But yeah, and that's kind of, that's where I am now. Fast forward, a few years, and I've done goodness knows how many races now, and yeah, love every second of it. We always used to talk about, you operate in the military, you operate within a box of standards, and the second that you step outside of that box is when you then increase the risk of something failing or something happening. You're doing something out of process, which then ultimately renders your aeroplane unserviceable. It's very much the same in Formula One. You want to stick to a real strict set of procedures and the methods in which those procedures are carried out, because it then limits, and obviously never removes completely, but it limits as much as possible any chance of any failure, because you don't want any kind of failure on track that's going to then retire the car or prevent you from winning a race or anything like that. So there are a load of similarities, and that goes right across the board, not just from an engineering perspective, but from a personnel perspective. I only ever worked on fast jet squadrons. I equate what I experienced there very closely to what I experienced in the garage. Remember, at the track, there's only, there's around 100, 120, I think, at the last count when I was last on a fast jet squadron, personnel to operate, say, a line of like 8 or maybe 10 jets. Here you have the core race team, which I'm a part of, which is 56 people. And then in addition to that, you have the other departments that provide people that work on race weekends. So invariably, it varies between 100 to maybe 200 personnel that we have at the track on a race weekend, depending on the type of race. So the numbers are the same. Obviously, we have 2 cars as opposed to 8 or 10 aeroplanes, but the mentality and the efforts required to ensure that you get the cars out on time, safely, ready to go, is the same as a a fast jet squadron, for example. I think for me, get on with the CV like as early as you possibly can, even if like I did 9-10 years before I knew I was going to even be in a position to think about leaving. I think because it just gets you into a mindset of what does good look like to a civilian employer, and how can I translate what I do in the military to a civilian employer. There's a whole raft of courses that you kind of get fed a lot of, all of the, I don't want to call them generic because it does them a disservice, but there's a lot of, your NEBOSH courses and health and safety courses and all of those things, which are incredibly valuable. But I think it's more valuable to have a good handle on how your CV should look. You don't want it to be any more than probably a side and a half of A4. So that does mean that it forces you to be very to the point, and it means that you can then just get information over very quickly, because anything that's longer than 2 sides can be a bit of a tedious read, I think. And this is all advice that I was given when I first attempted to write a CV. I think mine was might have been 2.5, maybe nearly 3 sides of A4. And the chap that I gave it to, he said, "I've got to be honest, it's incredibly wordy, and I was dozing off by the time we got to the second side. So you need to chop it down a lot. You want it to be this long. So get on with a good CV, definitely, and networking as well. Networking meant that I got to speak to people that, certainly within the team, that I could then forward my very rudimentary CV to, purely as a means not to say, here's my CV, give me a job. It was, I'm going to need to have a good CV written and to have some experience of what it's like to try and interview for a civilian job. So can you give me some advice? Does my CV read okay to you as a civilian employer? Does what's in it make sense? Does it translate from my military speak into civilian speak? So I think there's no doubt that military personnel have talents and abilities in abundance that any civilian employer would love to have, but they need to know, how does that translate into, you know, a civilian role and a civilian career. So yeah, CV, networking, get out to events, get out and just speak to people, you know, exchange numbers, stay in touch with people. Those sorts of things are incredibly valuable, I think, and that's what made my own transition, I think, as smooth as it could have been, really. I think it's discipline, number one. You've got to be very disciplined. You know, all the basics of punctuality, being correctly dressed. You know, we all wear team kit, which is, you know, it's a uniform, and the mindset of putting on a uniform and being somewhere on time when you need to be, you know, that, I mean, that shouldn't really change regardless of what civilian job you go to, right? But I think it's so ingrained within Formula One, particularly since we have, you know, curfew periods where you're not allowed at the track, or you're not allowed into the garage, you know, by a certain time. You have to leave by a certain time, otherwise there's penalties and things like that. I think, you know, all of those things that you get drilled into you during basic training in the military, regardless of service, they carry, excuse me, they carry on here in Formula One without any shadow of a doubt. And I think that, you know, that mentality means that people that have served in the military generally would do well in Formula One for certain.